Namaskar, respected admin, convener, and host of the webinar series, Professor Pramod Kumar Das, coordinators of this webinar series, Dr. Patit Pavan Das and Dr. Kailash Chandra Maharana, recording in charge and the moderator of today's event, Devasis Sadangi, speaker of today's event, Professor Dr. Mohin Mohammed, and dear participants. As you all know, that Philosophy Family is organizing a 12 days webinar series on Western philosophy starting from today, that is the 7th of September 2020, and it will continue till the 18th of September 2020. As you all know that we had a successful webinar series on Indian philosophy, and after that we had even a 3 days webinar series on Greek philosophy. During the webinar series on Greek philosophy, Professor Mohin Mohammed gave 3 lectures, one on the pre-Socratic philosophy, the second on the Socratic philosophy, and the last one on the post-Socratic philosophy. The time was short, he could not complete the entire the speech that he had planned to deliver. So today he is given one more chance to complete whatever is left in the ancient Greek period and make a historical development of the Greek philosophy till the beginning of the modern Western philosophy. In the last 3 talks, Professor Mohin Mohammed wanted to discuss Aristotle in length, but he could not do so because of the paucity of time. Today, most probably he will be concentrating his effort on Aristotle and some thinkers in the ancient and medieval period. Along with that, probably he will be making an assessment of the entire talk over the 3 days that of the webinar series that was concluded few days back. I hope I hope this series would be a successful one. I don't know why Mohan Mohammed sir is calling. Uh, is he not there in the virtual platform? I have to check. Professor Mohin Mohammed, he is calling. Is he not there in the platform? Mohin Mohammed, he's not there. Okay, let's see what has happened. Anyway, um, we'll go with the series. Let's see what is the problem with Mohin Mohammed, sir. Let me check and then let me join again. Please excuse me because some technical problem has
Okay, sir.
risen. Mohin Mohammed, sir, is not there in the list. He was there and he is not
Yeah.
there now. Some problem with him. Let me check. Let me talk to him and let me join again. 98611 98611 62403. He has joined now. Now he has joined. Yes. Now I could see Professor Mohin Muhammad in the list. He has just now he has joined again. There was a technical error. So I was saying that Professor Muhammad will be making an assessment of the ancient philosophy and will be passing through the medieval ages and will be touching to till the beginning of the modern Western philosophy. So in his talk today, he will be giving more importance to the concepts and issues in the philosophy of Aristotle. So I will not take much time because it's already 15 minutes we are behind schedule. So I straightforward I request Professor Mohin Muhammad to be ready. I invite him to deliver his lecture on the assessment of ancient philosophy till the beginning of the modern Western philosophy. Professor Mohin Muhammad. Professor, he is there. Okay, please deliver the lecture. Over to Professor Mohin Muhammad.
Thank you, Om. Yes, distinguished participants and the organizers. For the last three lecture, I had been speaking on the pre-Socratics and post-Socratics. I had completed till Plato. Now I'm going to discuss about the philosophy of Aristotle, as well as some medieval thinkers like Augustine and Aquinas. At the outset, it must be considered that I cannot treat Aristotle the way in which I had presented Plato in the last session. Despite the fact that Aristotle has broadened the embryonic system of Plato and tried to develop it into a full-fledged system with his writings devoted to every conceivable subject known to him and posterity. This is evident in Dante's remark. Dante was a great, Italian poet who had ascribed with an eulogy to Aristotle as the father of them who know everything, who know that. Primarily for his encyclopedic range of interest. Aristotle started as a student of Plato and perhaps the most brilliant and independent-minded among his fellow students. However, the mythical, enigmatic writings of Plato was taken far too literally by Aristotle, and his mistaken interpretation and criticisms have created a lots of problem for the later Platonism. Actually, Aristotle and his in the process, what Aristotle did, he started a mobile school called Lyceum. Aristotle's school was named as Lyceum against the Academy of Plato, and his mobile teaching habit gave a new name to his school. Belonging to a family of physicians, he had a chance to develop his scientific genius. The rest he owed to Plato, from whom he really did not differ in fundamental principles. As a matter of fact, it is not possible to discuss Aristotle in just one session. So let's confine our discussion only to his logic, metaphysics, ethics, and politics. It is one of the important contributions of Aristotle to the history of philosophy is the introduction of logic. He is the undisputable founder of logic. He has given it a scientific treatment of valid form of reasoning and worked it out in details. It is really a matter of surprise that he didn't handle the problem of inductive logic, which had to wait till Bacon and perhaps to John Stuart Mill. According to Aristotle, the function of logic is to describe the method of attaining knowledge and is considered to be the antecedent of all special inquiries. So it is called as a science of science. It deals with the analysis of the form and content of our thought, which leads to knowledge. In order to establish a scientific propositions, we don't merely have to show such and such found to be the case, but rather we have to prove that it could not be possibly be otherwise than what it is. Aristotle tried to provide a comprehensive process of elaborating how to derive propositions from the original truth. The derivative process is called deduction and named it as syllogism. It consists of two premises and a conclusion. A syllogism, in order to be true, the conclusion must necessarily follow from the premise taken jointly. The premises must themselves be universal and necessary. Therefore, they too must be proved. That is grounded on other premises. And again, the latter premises in turn are the conclusion of some other premises, and the process will continue till one reach a proposition or principle which cannot be proved deductively but have absolute certainty. These are called axioms or basic truths. According to Aristotle, axiom is indemonstrable and it has no proposition prior to it. These axioms are known by intuitions, that is, by direct and immediate insight of reason. However, Aristotle sometimes referred to process of induction, which we get to know the primary premises, a process that is through a process moving upward from particular to universal, without giving any proper explanation of what the process is all about. For this reason, Bacon has severely criticized Aristotle. But Aristotle survived the Bacon's onslaught by introducing categories which arrived empirically, such as the substance, quality, quantity, relation, time, place, etc. They are not only forms of thought, but are also predicate of reality. This is again, it appears that syllogistic argument had gone dogmatic character, led to dogmatic character to Aristotelianism, which became the ideal of scholastic philosophy in the Middle Ages. However, his doctrine of syllogism and predicables are treated as gateway to all the subjects. Again, this is all about his logic in a very nutshell. Uh, what is more important, how he applied this logic in his metaphysics. The most fundamental subject in Aristotle is what he called first philosophy or theology. But the latter generation came to know it as metaphysics, which is placed after physics. The function of science is to investigate the grounds of the things, and the function of highest science is to deal with the most universal grounds of things, or investigate the nature of being qua being, that is being of being, or that is what he calls substance. In this sense, it is known as first philosophy. Since Aristotle identifies substance as the ultimate category with God, the subject came to be spoken as theology too. But in Christian era, theology came to have close connection with Christianity as a revealed religion, and so has now come to be quite distinct from metaphysics. With this scientific propensity, Aristotle started with individual thing, which led him to develop a notion of substance in sharp contrast to the Platonic one. That is why he tried to criticize the Plato's theory of ideas. According to Aristotle, Plato has believed in a world of unchanging internal immediate form, immaterial forms corresponding to universal definitions such as beauty itself, equality itself, man himself, and so on. This was for him the only real world, and the forms were the only objects of true knowledge. The material world of growth and decay in which we live is not real or knowable at all. The intermediary between the two worlds, which in Plato's later thought does a great deal to bridge the gulf between them, that is the soul. Aristotle, on the other hand, moved away from his Platonic doctrine and shown a dominating interest in the world of concrete individual things perceptible by the senses. Aristotle entirely agreed with Plato that forms are the essential nature of the thing, but it seems to him that the forms are so completely cut up in Platonic doctrine from this material world that they cannot possibly be object of our knowledge. Furthermore, they are so completely cut up that they cannot be causes of the being of things of which we have experience. In any case, the things of which we have experience are individual concrete things, and how can a separate existing universal be their cause? Being convinced of this, Aristotle asserted that forms as depicted in Plato's work is not really the case. He put forward a number of arguments to show that the Plato's theory of idea is unreal, is useless, and impossible theory. In Metaphysics 940b, 8 to 11 paragraph, Aristotle says of the way in which we prove that forms exist, none is convincing. Far from so, no inference necessarily follows from it, and from some it follows that there are forms of things of which we think they are no forms. So this is what Aristotle has mentioned about the Platonic theory of form, and he has provided certain argument in those paragraphs of metaphysics, a very major work of Aristotle. Firstly, Aristotle pointed out that the theory of form is useless because the forms are only duplicating the visible things. Forms are intended to explain the nature of things, but it fails to do so. Instead of explaining it, Plato assumed the existence of another multitude of things. Plato is like a man who, being unable to count with a small number of things and some number of a small number, and thinks that it will be easier for him to do so if he doubles the number. Secondly, the forms are useless when it comes to explaining the movement of things. Even if a thing exists of a form, because of a thing exists because of a form, how does form explain the movement of things and for their coming into being and passing away? The form are motionless, and the objects of this world are the copies of the form. Then, should the object of this world are motionless too? Copleston, however, pointed out that this sort of criticisms against Plato is off the mark because Plato has never held that forms are the moving cause of the things, but on the other hand, he introduced the concept of demiurge to account for the dynamism of the world. Thirdly, the forms are supposed to explain sensible objects out that will themselves be sensible. For example, the ideal man will be sensible like Socrates. The form will resemble the anthropomorphic gods. The latter were only eternal men, and so the forms are only eternal sensibles. But here it may be said that the forms are a subsistent concept or ideal types, and so the subsistence concept of man will contain the idea of corporeality. But there is no reason why it should itself be corporeal. Fourthly, according to Aristotle, Plato's theory of form is an impossible theory, as it is held the substance that of which it is the substance should exist apart. How can the ideas, being the substance of thing, exist apart? Moreover, Plato has not explained the relation of forms to things. Plato tries to explain the relations by the use of terms such as participations and imitations. But Aristotle observed that the use of these words and to say that sensible things are patterns patterns of other things, patterns and other things share in them, do not give any account of the relationship between the form and the sensible thing, but it's merely uttering some poetic metaphors. And lastly, but there are many more arguments, but lastly, I would like to just point out this argument. The forms will be individual objects like those other objects of which they are the forms, whereas they should not be individuals but universal. The ideal man, for example, will be an individual like Socrates. Here, Aristotle pointed out that Plato's theory of form always leads to a third man problem. Whenever there is a common element, there must be one idea or form. Thus, there is a common element in all men, and therefore there is a form of man. But there is also a common element to the individual man and the idea of man. Then there must be a further idea or form of the that is called the third man to explain this. And between this further idea and the individual man, there must be yet another idea to explain what they have in common, and so on. This leads to an infinite regress. So Plato's Platonic ideas just is not so successfully been explained by Plato what Aristotle felt like. After pointing out the difficulties in Plato's theory of idea, Aristotle regards particular objects or individual beings as real substance, but the true nature or the essence of the particular concrete being is constituted by its form, that is, the essential qualities of the class to which it belongs. Thus, for him also, form or idea is the most essential element of the particular object, like that of Plato. Thus, according to Aristotle, there is a plurality of individual substance. The substance arrange themselves in an ascending order, where the indeterminate matter is at the bottom and the God or pure form is at the top. The entire order of substance or forms, such as individual physical objects, plants, animal, and men, lies between these two extremes, that is, pure form and indeterminate matter. So every individual form is an admixture of form and matter, including its dimension, qualities, relation, etc., which can be separated only by an act of abstraction. For Aristotle, form is the universal aspect of things, the essential unity shared by all things of the same type. Matter, on the other hand, should be understood in the sense of what is opposed to form. So matter in Aristotelian sense is to be understood what is opposite to form, but not in the sense of mind as the modern philosopher used it. It confers individuality and uniqueness. So matter is the principle of individuation. For example, a marble statue. Here the matter is the marble of which the statue is made, and the shape put into it is the form. So there are different statues of marble. So marble is the principle of individuation. Form only add qualities to it. For Aristotle, form and matter are inseparable aspects of individual thing. They can only be distinguished by a process of mental analysis, not by mind in reality. Actually, form and content, they are the two indispensable feature element of the particular thing, and they cannot be separate. We cannot separate them, form and matter, in a thing in reality, but rather we can separate them only by the exercise, only by the help of mind. There are not two things which are compounded mechanically or chemically to make a complete thing. There cannot be any form without matter except pure form, that is God, and there cannot be any matter without form except the first matter, that is the first matter, the indeterminate matter. The first matter is the indeterminate matter because no form was put on it. It is completely without matter, without form. So this is called the first matter. They are fused together into a unity to make a particular individual thing. This separation of form and mind will be more clear when Aristotle considered the actual process of becoming or change or growth. Every particular object is changeable. It is now seed, now sapling, now tree, and now he hopes that there is something unchanging on which all the changes take place. Again, when we say object changes, it forms, we do not mean that the form itself changes. As a matter of fact, form cannot change. Matter assumes different form. So that means forms, if marble, if a statue of Gandhi is made of marble and another statue of Nehru made of marble, that means form, matter is matter is different, but the form, suppose we explain a tree, as Aristotle has given example. The tree, first it appears as a sapling, then it grows into a bigger tree and still bigger tree. So in all these things, don't think that form is changing, form of the tree is changing. Rather, what changes, it is a new form. Sapling is a new form from this form of the seed, and tree is the new form from the same matter. So matter just is the form emergence. It becomes a new form. Rather, forms always becomes a new one when the matter keeps on changing. So a series of forms, one following the another. So we have to assume a substratum, that is matter, the possibility that that matter has the possibility and changing qualities, that is form which is though unchanging, responsible for the growing world. Besides, Aristotle's concept of form and matter are relative in nature. A particular thing may be a matter from one point of view, but a form from another point of view. For example, wood is matter if considered in relation to bed, but considered as a form in relation to growing plant. This relativity of form and matter leads to another distinction made by Aristotle, that is the distinction between potentiality and actuality of a single substance. The potential being is the earlier state, and the actuality is the latter stage of the development of a substance. Like the acorn to the oak, material of the building to the complete building, the potential is something lying latent in the thing. The actuality is the complete thing. So in the ascending series of form, ascending series from matter to form, potentiality to activity, that the progressive realization of the superiority of form over the matter. So form in the progressive manner, in the progressing process, form has got some superiority over the matter. Thus, Aristotle calls matter the principle of potentiality and form the principle of actuality or reality. Only the past matter, which we can only think of but doesn't exist as such, is mere potentiality. Every form, like Platonic idea, is eternal, fixed, objective, and abiding. But instead of being outside of the matter, it is in the matter, it is within the matter. Form and matter coexisted always in a thing. Form realizes itself in the thing. It causes the thing to move and an to realize an end or purpose of this object. As the physical world is in a state of becoming, Aristotle's notion of causation carries a greater significance. According to Aristotle, there are four types of cause, as we know. It is popularly known. There are material cause, formal cause, efficient cause, and final cause. The matter out of which a thing is made, it is material cause, and the shape and the form that is given to that matter is called the formal cause, but the agency which put the form on matter is called efficient cause. Lastly, there is a final cause which brings out the purpose why the individual thing has come into being. Though his followers on latter ages overemphasized the final cause and stood in the way of scientific development, a emphasis was given on this final cause during this Middle Ages. But from the philosophic point of view, as bringing out the teleological aspect of things have their own legitimate place in the scheme of things and brings out the true relationship between the idealism of Plato and Aristotle. Besides metaphysics, Aristotle's ethics emerged as a response to Socratic question that what constitutes the highest good. All human action has some end in view, and this end may be a means to higher end. This still has a higher end, and so on. But finally, we must reach a supreme end or purpose, or ultimate purpose or good, for the sake of which every other good is to be sought. Thus, the highest good for man is the complete or habitual exercise of the function which make him a person. This is what called by Aristotle as eudaimonia, means happiness as contrast to hedonic pleasure. Pleasure accompanied virtuous activities as a secondary effect and thus included in highest good, but not identical with it. Interpretation of just a minute. So, Aristotle's ethics that actually is just an, I am just making it short, that is just a Aristotle ethics is just not in conformity with the Socratic's view that knowledge is virtue. So Aristotle, what Aristotle is saying that knowledge is there, but we should must act and possess those knowledge. According to Aristotle, a virtuous soul is well-ordered soul in which a right relation exists between reason, feeling, and desire. The perfect action of reason constitute intellectual efficiency or Dionysic virtue, the virtue of wisdom. The perfect action of emotional and impulsive function of the soul is called moral virtue. That is temperance, courage, liberality, etc. It consists in a rational attitude towards bodily appetites, towards fear, anger, danger, desires, for economic goods, desire for economic goods, fame, and so on. This attitude consists in a striking mean between extreme and deficiency. For example, courage is a mean between cool hardlines and cowardice. This principle of mean is not universal in its applicability. The mean is not same for all individual and under all circumstances. So it is relative to ourselves and determined by reason. But it is not a matter of subjective opinion or arbitrary choice. The virtuous man is the standard and the measure of things. In just this, I think this possibility has led to legitimize applied philosophy. This is Aristotle ethics has given a possibility of the emergence of applied philosophy, because here the standards of morality can be applied it to the situation depending on how you assess the situation. It's not so. It is at the same time he gave a cautionary note, a caveat that it is not a subjective opinion. It is not a subjective opinion or arbitrary choice. The virtuous man is the standard and measure of things. So a virtuous man have a complete knowledge of the standards and how he applies with his modesty and wisdom. That will really determine the application of the moral standards. Thus, the highest good for man is self-realization. A man realizes his true self when he loves or gratifies the supreme part of his being, that is the rational part. This is possible when he is moved by a motive of nobleness and when he promotes the interest of the others and serves his country. If needed, he would die for justice, for them and for justice. And justice is a virtue implying a relation to others, whether he be a ruler or simply a fellow citizens. It is taken in two senses, lawfulness and fairness. Law is made for the interest of the community as a whole. All the virtues are included in justice. The difference between virtue and justice lies in the varying context in which they are considered. That if it is considered in relation to other, it is justice, and if it is considered as a state of character, it is virtue. The highest happiness is a speculative activity which takes the form of contemplation. It is the most pleasant and most self-sufficient and most intrinsically worthwhile way of life. Man will enjoy such a life in the virtue of humanity, but in virtue of some divine element in him. A moral society is necessary to foster moral action. Laws are also required to teach us duties of life. The state should provide a social environment conducive to morality of its citizens. If necessary, impose some punishment to enforce morality. So ethics and politics are not divorced by him. Moral ends of life are promoted by a legal political means. So this is what the Aristotelian perspective and his perspective of logic, metaphysics, and ethics, which I have just mentioned. But now, after Aristotle, there are the Greek philosophy was gradually in a state of wane, and the philosophers After the end of Greek philosophy, ancient philosophy, towards the end of our ancient philosophy, there emerged a age of there emerged a medieval age, which is dominated by the Christian religion, or the Jews or Christian religion. So it has been a widespread tendency among the students of history of philosophy to move straight from Plato and Aristotle to Bacon and Descartes, avoiding the medieval period. The Edict of Justin, one of the ruler in ancient Greek state, one of the Greek state, for closing the school at Athens, marked the official end of ancient philosophy, and that led to the advent of medieval period. It established the new Christian religion. In fact, except the historians, nobody would seriously suppose that a coherent and adequate account of the development of European culture and philosophy, if the medieval philosophy is omitted. Without, the historians remark that without considering the medieval philosophy, the entire history of philosophy and culture of West is just incomplete. Just it is one of the, it is generally in France, the philosopher enlightened, philosopher of French Enlightenment, they just have a view that the middle period is a dark period. But nevertheless, the study of middle period or middle age is important, because in the sense that it acted as an antithesis in the dialectical development of Western philosophy, and acted as an instrument in the emergence of Renaissance and modern philosophy. All the tenets of medieval period emerged in Latin. The medieval period started with the patristic tradition. It was a fusion. Patristic tradition is a fusion of Hellenic philosophy. Hellenic philosophy means Greek philosophy. Hellenic philosophy and Christian religion. It was much richer than philosophy, because it not only includes philosophy but religion. Augustine was the chief representative of this tradition. Before patristic philosophy, there were other two kinds of philosophy we came across in the medieval period. They are very much prevalent there in that time. They are Gnosticism and the apologisticism. The adherents of Gnosticism sought to rationalize the Christian religion. They transformed faith into knowledge. They speculated upon their faith and sought a harmony between faith and knowledge, science and religion. The apologistic shared with Gnostics their general objective of rendering the new religion intelligible. They appealed to philosophy in the defense of faith against the interpretation of Gnosticism. For them, Christianity is both philosophy and revelation. Its truths are supernatural in origin and absolutely certain, and they are rational truth, though they could be comprehended only by divinely inspired mind. Coming back to Augustine, he was the greatest constructive thinker of Middle Ages and most influential one, and is the guide of the Christian philosophy. His philosophy is not so systematic, yet it touches on all the basic philosophical problems. Although we find some influence of Plato and Aristotle in his thought, yet it is dominated by Christian thought. Augustine believed that only knowledge worth having is the knowledge of God. All knowledge like science, logic, metaphysics, ethics, etc., have value as far as they contribute to the knowledge of God. If we turn inward, we would find God and soul. One God is thought of as the trinity of existence, motion, and order, and the substantial unity of soul is the reflection of Trinity, which exhibits existence, knowledge, and will. To find the one is to find the other. For Augustine, the philosophy is worth pursuing, which gives knowledge that leads to true and lasting happiness and means to attain it. He asserted that philosophizing is a search for wisdom, and true wisdom is to be found only in the knowledge and possession of God. One can grow in wisdom only by the grace of God, and the real happiness can be fully attained in the vision of God. Philosophy as a search would be left behind only when search is fully attained. Augustine did not make any distinction between philosophy and theology. In regard to Christian faith, Augustine holds that faith precedes, but that it should be followed wherever possible by the understanding. The intellectual penetration of faith and its implication is theological activity. From the above exposition, it apparently gives an impression that Augustine is a skeptic, as he seems to doubt everything external other than faith in God. But a careful reading of his book, The Confession, exhibits that his skepticism was not a philosophy which would give him satisfaction, because firstly, he was a passionate seeker of truth by which a man can live. Secondly, he realized that he cannot doubt everything. For example, reflection can convince one that he cannot be deceived in thinking that he exists. For you cannot be deceived if you do not exist. That is, if a man deceived, I am. This is what he has perhaps anticipated Descartes, but unlike Descartes, he does not use this truth as a basis of a philosophical system. Augustine was well aware of the problem of sense knowledge. Augustine doesn't doubt that there are external objects, but there are cases where at first sight we can doubt the testimony and reliability of senses. For example, an oar, when half immersed in water, appears bent. It is not an error, but Augustine answered, it is in negation. He asserted, if we say the half immersed or apparently appear to be bent, we are speaking what is true. But if we say that the oar is really bent, then we are going beyond the testimony of sense. Here the error lies in our judgment of testimony, not the testimony itself. Sight shows us how the oar appears in certain circumstances, but it doesn't tell us what the oar is in itself, apart from its appearance in certain circumstances. So sight cannot tell lie. By giving such an exposition about the sense knowledge, Augustine trying to assert that external things cause modification in sense organ. Thus, the corporeal cannot act upon the incorporeal or spiritual. In fact, the mind forms the judgment observing the modification of senses, but the senses do not make any judgment. So logical truth or falsity are predicated of judgments. So we cannot speak senses as erring, though they provide occasions for false judgment by the mind. Now a question may arise: how can fallible mind grasp the truth of infallible certainty? A modern philosopher would say that yes, mind has the ability to recognize the truth of analytic proposition. However, according to Augustine, human mind has the ability to rise above itself and its dependence on the sense organs and enter the sphere of eternal truths. But how? How can one enter into the sphere of eternal truths? Here, for sometimes, he was tempted by Plato's theory or myth of reminiscence, where mind recalls what it saw in previous life. But later, Augustine rejected this view as he did not believe in the previous life. Instead, he introduces his own theory of divine illumination, which enables us not only to see eternal truth, but also to judge of things in relation to the eternal truths or ideas. But again, Augustine seems to have borrowed this idea of light and illumination from Plato's myth of cave, where man turns from the darkness to the light, or sphere of eternal light, or the sphere of eternal truth and spiritual reality. He turns towards the light and is illuminated. Here in Augustine we find an application of Plato's idea of illumination to the Christian belief, in the light of which enlightens every man who comes into this world. But Augustine has not given any clear-cut account of the precise nature and function of this divine illumination as he thought it to be. So after Augustine, there emerged another important medieval philosopher, Thomas Aquinas, who actually tried, who actually he didn't accept the complete, explanation of religion by this kind of by this kind of, kind of wild imagination or something like that. But he has tried to bring rational method. He has tried to bring some rational methods to prove the theology, or prove the religious truth by, of course, he has taken the help of revelation, but he has tried as much as possible by making use of Aristotelian concepts, Aristotelian doctrines. He tried that the notion of God or notion of divinity could be equally understood rationally. The most primary objective of Saint Aquinas is to demonstrate the rationality of the universe as a revelation of God. Here one can see a wonderful blend of Augustinian metaphysics and Aristotelian method. According to Thomas, in philosophy following Aristotle, we move from fact to God, and in theology from God to facts. So he brought a clear-cut distinction between faith and reason. Dogmas like Trinity, Incarnation, Original Sin, the sacrament, etc., are not objects of philosophy but matter of faith. They are beyond reason but not contrary to reason. We cannot prove them nor dispute them, but we can at least dispute the objection to them. No necessary proof can be provided to the doctrine that the world is created in time. It is a matter of revelation, but there is nothing unreasonable in it. Only their plausibility is to be made clear. Faith for Aquinas is a matter of will. The will commands acceptance coming from without. Following Aristotle, Aquinas accepted that Genuine knowledge is conceptual knowledge. Concepts have their sources in the sense perception. The soul has different functions such as faculty of sensation, faculty of active intellect, faculty of potential intellect, and all of them have different functions. Through sensation, the soul receives copies or forms of the particular sensible object. The potential intellect receives them without any corporeal element. This is done by active intellect, which fashions sensible copies into the intelligible copy, which later assimilated by soul in conformity to its nature. These intelligible copies contains only the essential qualities. Thus, Thomas made use of both sensational and conceptual aspect. The Thomas makes the use of both sensational and conceptual aspects of our knowledge, the particular and the universal. Knowledge is implication in mind and is made explicit when the mind is aroused into action by sensation. Since knowledge is grounded in sense perception, it is necessary for the philosopher to start his explanation from the world of experience and from experience to the principle or essence of things. Such a science is called metaphysics. So there can be science when there are universal and only where there are particulars with common qualities. Since every spiritual being is a species of its own, there can be no universal notion of spiritual being and no genuine knowledge of them. Thus, following Aristotle, Thomas holds that nature is a union of form and matter. Nature, a substance of a corporeal being, consists of forms and matter. By substance, he means that through a thing is what it is. With the help of these two principles, matter and form, Thomas tried to account for the order and purposiveness in the nature and also explain the existence of particular object or plurality of things. Again, he holds that matter is the principle of individuation. The diversity of individuals of the same species depends on difference of the bodily constitution or a definite quantity of matter together with all the accidental and peculiar to this particular quantum of matter and makes an object what it is. In case of man, it is because of the soul is connected with the organic body that he is this particular man. Besides, the forms which inhere in matter can exist by themselves, which do not need matter in order to be real. They are called subsistent form. Among these pure spiritual beings, angels and human souls are there. Their substance or notion is not matter and form, but only form, which make them what they are. According to Aquinas, God is pure form, pure actuality. We have the knowledge of God by faith, but we can also attain knowledge of Him by reasoning. Though such knowledge is indirect and mediate knowledge, or indirect or mediate knowledge, in all our reasoning, we pass from known to unknown, from effect to cause. We can infer His existence from His creation and we can prove it by posterior methods. Thomas rejects the ontological argument of Anselm and makes use of the proof employed by Aristotle. St. Augustine and Al-Farabi, an Arabic philosophers, and Aristotle are taken jointly by Aristotle, by Aquinas, to give certain proofs about the God from the known things to the unknown things, that is from things of the world to the existence of God. This is also forms of a reasoning. Each argument, as we know, that from the cause of the moment to the first cause, this is that everything moves and it doesn't move unless someone make it to move. So in process, another mover is required. So this process will go on until you accept a first mover. Secondly, from contingent to necessary being. Everything in this world is contingent. In every sensible things, it's contingent. It depends on something. So from this, it requires that world, which is such a bigger thing, it cannot be made by any finite being. So this maker of this huge world must be someone who is God, who is the highest being. This is argument he has drawn from the Arabian philosopher, Muslim philosopher, that is Al-Farabi. And from degree of perfection, it is from Augustine, he has borrowed it, that everything strive for perfection. So everything tries to for perfection, and there is a degree of perfection, some more or less. But how can you explain more or less unless you assume a highest thing, itself, a most perfect being, and this most perfect being is called God. This type of argument he has borrowed it from Augustine. And again, he has also borrowed an idea from the purpose of each individual thing. Every individual thing has a purpose or aim to achieve. So there are, things. World is such a bigger thing that it cannot be a purpose of any finite being. It must be the purpose of something who is infinite, and this infinite being is taken as the supreme being, that is God. Thus, God is the first and final and purposive cause of the universe. He is pure actuality. If he were mere potential being, then something else would have been required to actualize it, and he would not be the first cause. Then God created this world out of nothing. If he created out of matter, then he would not have been pure form, and matter would have been to emanate from him. Then he cannot, his form, his pure form, the character of being pure would be lost. So philosophically not possible to demonstrate that the world has beginning in time, no more that it is not. But neither we can prove that it has a beginning in time, nor we can disprove that it has a beginning in time. But we depend on revelation to believe. So both of the things, that it is beginning in time and it is not beginning in time, both are possible. So it is by revelation, he says that we have to believe that God has created the world in a particular moment of time, because time is created along with the world. Okay, it is not something separate from the God. In this way, he has tried to rationalize the proofs and the arguments given by his predecessors, and Augustine just demonstrated or exhibited that how religion can also, faith, obviously religion is based on faith, but at the same time that religion also can explain the nature of the supreme being of God. So this is how there are so many other philosophy in between. There are Sufism, Islam, Sikhism, Judaism, and there are other thinkers like Occam and others. But gradually what happens in the process, the church, the medieval philosophy started degenerating, and the church dominated on every aspect of life. So this gave rise to a kind of revolution which giving birth to Renaissance, and finally the emergence of modern philosophy at the with the started with the Bacon. And next will be next sessions would start with the Bacon's philosophy. This is how I have tried to summarize. This cannot be possible to summarize all the to speak in this such a short span of time. All the things I have not done. I feel that I have not justice. I have done justice to this medieval period, but and post-Aristotelian, post-Neoplatonic philosophy. But this is how one has to wind it up till the emergence of Renaissance and modern philosophy. Thank you very much for the patient hearing and all the. Okay, it is over to Om.
Thank you, sir, for your lecture on Aristotle at length and on Saint Aquinas and Saint Augustine. Well, there are still more areas. Well, you have accepted that it is a very lengthy area, and we all know that it's a big area. You cannot cover so many thinkers in a short time within 1.5 hours. So the best possible thing that the best that you can do, that you have tried on your part. You have touched Aristotle, Saint Anselm, Saint Aquinas, and Saint Augustine. It is all open for discussion and all the things. People know you and they can contact you for any clarifications and doubts. Yes, and on the discussion of the thinkers. So since the time doesn't permit to discuss all the thinkers, we may be excused. Now I request Debashis Sadangi to carry on the question and answer session. Please check the questions in the chat box and put those questions before the speaker.
Thank you very much, sir, and good evening to all. Namaskar, sir. So, first question is from Prabhat Nalini Devi. Prabhat Nalini Devi, are you here? You can unmute yourself and can ask your question. Prabhat Nalini Devi. Hello. Are you here? Hello. Prabhat Nalini Devi, you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Okay, fine. I am asking her question. She asked that according to Aristotle, there are 4 kinds of causes, but I think final cause is the effect of the combination of the material, formal, and efficient cause in relation to conjunction of causes and intermixture of effect. She wants a clarification.
Well, philosophically, it is very important, but when you explain something scientifically, okay, you have to explain it. What is its matter? What is its underlying what is what form? What is its form? And who and what is the agency that how the intelligence of the agent is responsible to give a shape to this the effect. So all these causes, the material and formal and the efficient cause, they are highly essential from a scientific point of view, because I know thus Aristotle has a propensity towards science. So because that is why he has put more emphasis on the empirical state of things. So yes, philosophically, it is final cause is important because it gives you a teleological aspects of the analysis. So which is more which has got a special place in philosophy. So philosophically, it is important, the final cause, but all these three causes, that material and the instrumental cause, the efficient cause, or the formal cause, they are important for the explanation of the thing in a scientific way.
Okay. Her second question is revelation on reality scientific?
Yes, revelation is scientific, not scientific, actually it is reasonable, okay? Because revelation is done, what Aquinas actually is trying to say, that there are certain things which cannot be known by philosophy, okay? Nor we can disprove them by reason, okay? But at least we can, what we can do, we can, you can just respond to their objections, that we can respond to their objection, or we can answer their objections. So in this way, those things which cannot be proved rationally or directly, or which cannot be demonstrated, they are to believe indirectly, and by through a reason. They are not unreasonable. Revelation is not unreasonable. So this is an indirect way of knowing the divine things.
Okay, sir. Next question is from K. of Narayan Rao, sir. Why did Aristotle call his metaphysical exposition as first philosophy?
The function of science is to what science is to do. Science to examine the principle behind a thing. Okay, what is the being of being? What is the first thing? Okay, the indeterminate matter. Okay, and to reach the that's why it is the first philosophy. First, you know the being. Okay, a being of being. Being stands for various things. Being stands for various individual things. But we have to the form. Actually, being here, Aristotle means form, and the being of being, being qua being. That is why it is called the first philosophy. Because it is the foundation of all kind of sciences. Okay, that is why it is called the first philosophy.
Okay, and then the next question is, what can be said as the metaphysical problem of Aristotle?
Metaphysical problem of Aristotle is to show, Plato has propounded a world of ideas which exist by itself, completely cut up from the world of experience. So Aristotle Aristotle having a leaning towards or propensity towards science, he wanted to ground the form. He wanted to have a basis of the form in sense experience. How could he do it? This is the major problem of metaphysics for Aristotle.
Okay, sir. Then the next question is, in what ways Saint Augustine and Saint Aquinas are similar, and in what ways different?
Yeah, Aquinas, both believe in theology, both believe in the Christian religion. Augustine, he doesn't have much confidence in the or he doesn't take much help of reason. He doesn't take much help of a scientific way of establish or the rational way of establishing the existence of God or existence of divine things related to divinity. But Aquinas just departed from Augustine. It is not that Aquinas has rejected all the doctrines of Augustine. Aquinas has just tried to make it more philosophical, more rational, by putting some arguments just in consonance and in agreement with Aristotelian type of reasoning. So he has made extensive use of Aristotle's arguments in understanding the religion or things related to religion.
Okay, sir. The next question is from Ratnakar Gajendra. He wants to know what is the reason that the medieval philosophers are emphasizing the concept of God.
Pardon?
He wants to know the reason why the medieval philosophers are emphasizing the concept of God.
Okay, they are trying to make a combination of philosophy and religion, and obviously religion, except humanism and Theravada, religion is a common feature of religion to have the concept of God. Okay, so obviously as a Christian philosopher and they're living to Christianity, they will have. It is quite natural of them to assume the existence of God, or to provide proofs for the existence of God. So without God, there is no Christian religion, and these people they are the true adherents of Christianity.
Yes, sir. And then the next question is why logic is a finished science in the hand of Aristotle?
Because logic happens to be it consists of our laws of thought. Without logic, can you imagine any science or any subject for that matter? So logic is quite important. It is the gateway of to all the subjects. So that is why logic is in all the sciences or subjects. They are culminated or they are perfect. Their culmination are perfectly in consonation with logic. So logic is just a starting as well as finishing point of all the subjects. Otherwise, it is not intellectually intelligible.
Okay, sir. Then the next question is from Raja Misra. He wants to know what's the difference between Aristotle's concept of universal from that of Plato.
Well, universal means, this is a very major difference, that Aristotle, at the Plato's ideas or Plato's universal concept of universals, they are not rooted in experience. They are coming from the insight of minds, insight of mind, and they origin in region. They move through region and they ancient region. But Aristotle universals, they are just an abstraction from different particular sensible things. For example, the universal of color, it has been abstracted from different colors like white colors, green colors, violet colors, all those colors. So this is the difference, that Aristotle abstract his universal from sense experience or sensible objects, and Plato, in other words, it has for him the universals are just a product of human mind, and by the insight it has produced by the insight of the human minds. They don't have anything to do with the particular sensible things. That is why Aristotle has criticized Plato. But again, Aristotle falls the victim to his criticism, to his own criticism against Plato, because ultimately Aristotle has to admit the pure form as well as indeterminate matter. So Aristotle has to admit a matterless form, or that is pure form.
Then the next question is, what's the major disagreement between Aristotle and Plato?
This is the major disagreement actually. This is it. Aristotle has, has a larger dependence on sense experience, and Plato's is dependent. Plato does not depend on sense experience. Rather, his doctrine emerging, his doctrine is all concerned about the mind and its reason. Okay, so this is the major difference. Otherwise, Aristotle has completely followed Plato in all respect.
Okay. The next question is from Rasmi Prabha Mahanti. She wants to know how Augustine explains the problem of evil and what do we mean by evil?
Evil, is a suffering, kind of suffering. It is a mental suffering. It is the suffering maybe imposed by the human beings, or it may be due to natural calamities, natural calamity, etc. This is how evil is a kind of suffering. Okay, and Augustine says that evil, the world is basically good. Okay, and when man does not, he has given man absolute liberty to choose what he is to do. So if he doesn't conform to the dictates of God, then ultimately he has to suffer and evils set in. And evils are there for a good purpose too, for Augustine, because evil actually, how can you think that you can become a good person without struggling against the evil? So life will be better. You will come out as a better person and a child of God if you fought through evil. Okay.
Okay, sir. Then Manaswini Patnaik, please unmute yourself and ask your question. Actually, her question, as I see, it is about Buddhism. She wants to explain about Theravada. Theravada is something about Buddhism, I think. This is not a related topic.
It is something related to Buddhism. That is a religion that doesn't admit the existence of God. Okay? This is the kind of religion we used to have it in a Theravada, a sect of Buddhism. Okay, so I don't have much idea about that, but I have just known that Theravada is a religion, kind of religion, without admitting the existence of a supernatural being or God.
Yeah. Then Sulagna Chaudhary wants to know, could you please explain what Plato actually means by insight through which men can know about forms?
Yes, for Plato,
Yes, sir.
forms are real, and if we want to explain a thing, we have to explain by it underlying nature and structure, and the form makes the thing what it is. Okay, suppose table. He wanted to know what makes a table a table. Okay, and for Plato, the form of the table, which may roughly be called the essence of the table, that the form, that not essence is a very crude word, the form of the table, that constitute the underlying nature and structure which makes a table a table. Okay, but how could you know this form? This is the problem for Plato. Plato, because he has rejected in his epistemology, as we are aware, that in his epistemology, Plato has rejected sense perception altogether as a source of knowledge. Okay, so that is why. So where do the form come? They come from the mind, the reason. Region resides in mind. It is a very indispensable part of mind. Okay, so mind has an insight. Okay, to just have a glimpse of, to have a glimpse of what a form is, and if the form confirms a object to it, then if the form of the table conforms to this object, then I will call it table. This is what Platonic line of thinking. But Aristotelian is a different, as I told. The Aristotelian line is that from different individual tables, I can abstract a form of table. This is how Plato wanted to understand his form by an insight, because mind, it is my insight. Insight means it is from mind. I can have the essence of a table, so that I can identify easily as of an object as table.
Yes, sir. Then the next question is from Rasmi Prabha Mahanti. She wants to know why Aquinas makes a distinction between essence and existence.
This is quite obvious, because he is a follower of Aristotle. Of course, he has a religious purpose for that, but he has based his religion on the doctrines of Aristotle. Okay, Aristotle says that essence, or the substance, or the being is one which makes a thing that exists in sense experience. Suppose that is why the essence, a thing keeps on changing. But unless we admit a essence in everything, it is very difficult for us to identify a particular object. That is why essence is quite essential. Particular existed things, they may change, they may grow, they may decay, but the form remains as it is. The essence remains as it is. It can never change. It may assume a there are so many, of course, there are so many essences, but existence can only be explained through essence. This is Aristotle's words.
Then she wants to know again, what do you mean by essence and existence?
Just I told it here.
Yeah. Then Priti Manjari Khuntia wants to know if there is not any change in forms, then what is the difference between form and new form?
Form and new form.
Yes, sir.
Form and new form. Suppose this is a form, form of seed, okay, and it changes. The same, tree, the form, it also takes another big tree, okay, so from seed to sapling to, same matter, okay. The same matter becomes a form of seed, it becomes a form of sapling, and becomes a form of tree. So here matter is the same tree, but the form is not changing. Form is a new one, is a different one. Okay, new form means it's a different form, not a changing form. It's a different form.
I think there are no questions in the chat box. Anyone wants to ask something, you can unmute yourself and ask. You can ask your question. Okay, thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much for your clarification, for your lucid explanation of all those questions and a nice presentation. Now it's over to K. Om Narayan Rao, sir.
Thank you, Devashish. I should thank the speaker for the presentation, and also thank the way he responded to the questions. So overall, it's a successful seminar, successful webinar, and Though we have started this webinar with this talk by Professor Mohin Mohammed, actually today's webinar marks an end of the discussion on the Greek philosophy. Rather, we are starting the modern Western philosophy from tomorrow. Today's webinar is an end of the webinar series on Greek philosophy. Okay, so that should be seen like that. So from tomorrow onwards, we'll be starting with Francis Bacon, and till Immanuel Kant. We'll be having a series of webinars for 12 long days, and it will be around 24 sessions. So I request the participants to join in more numbers, because from Bacon to Kant, it's the thing that would be discussed is there in the syllabus, so the teachers and the students should join with much conviction that something has to be learned. Okay, the main objective of philosophy family is to learn. So it's an attempt to know things. Well, there are books, we know many things, but that doesn't mean that we know everything. So it's an attempt to share knowledge, to know from each other, to enrich ourselves. So if I look into the participation today, it is not that convincing as compared to the earlier days, the webinars in the earlier days. More than 100 participants used to participate, but today I could see around 60 participants have participated. I request the members of the philosophy family to participate in more numbers, because from tomorrow onwards we are starting the modern Western philosophy in the real sense, and I hope, though today's lecture is a convincing one, from tomorrow, so there would be, I think, more of interest in all the teachers and the student friends, because much of the things would be discussed from the syllabus, the things that are there in the courses. So I hope more number of participants will be joining this event from tomorrow onwards, and with much hope, with much future for this philosophy family, I once again request the participants to join more numbers and make this entire webinar series a successful one, like the way they have made the webinar series on Indian philosophy a successful one by participating in large numbers. So with these words, I once again thank Professor Mohin Mohammed for speaking a total of 8 hours, taking back to 3 days during the webinar series on Greek philosophy, and the 2 hours today. So around 8 hours he has talked on the Greek philosophy. I thank him a lot for the effort that he has put into the philosophy family, for enriching all of us. I thank you, sir, for being so kind and giving a lot of time to enrich all those involved in this family. So I thanks once again, sir. Your contribution to the philosophy family is recorded. So I hope we will be in touch with you in future, so that we can get more and more from you. So once again, I announce that from tomorrow onwards we are having the webinar on modern Western philosophy in a real sense. Tomorrow we have the first session on Francis Bacon's method in Idolas. So Professor Kalachandra Das will be speaking to you in the first session on Bacon's Idolas, and in the next session, the second session, I will be speaking on the inductive method of Bacon. So I wish people to join more numbers and make this event successful. Thank you everybody, the participants, for making today's webinar a successful one. So I thank even the participants for being patient enough to getting to the lecture and posing important questions to be taken on by the speaker. Thank you everybody. Now I declare this meeting end for the day, and I hope more number of people will join tomorrow. Thank you, thanks a lot. Over to Devasis to